Welcome back to another episode of 1.73 Mission Over Measure. Today we are joined by Rick Sutkiewicz. Rick, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to just dive into your background a little bit and just talk about, where you're from, who you work for currently, and kind of how you got there so far. Just macro overview.
Thank you for having me today. I'm Rick Sutkiewicz. I'm the president of ThermalNetics. We are a manufacturer representative for the commercial air conditioning refrigeration market, also in the automotive industrial market. My journey, I was born in Michigan, traveled around the country. My father was an executive with Chrysler, lived in various places, came back to Michigan in my teens, went to University of Michigan to engineering school, and began my career in technical sales with a company called York International, large air conditioning company that's now owned by Johnson Controls. Spent 14 years with York, the sales engineer at first, and then progressive levels of management, and began my entrepreneurial journey in February of 2004, where we acquired, myself and two partners, a business named ThermalNetics Incorporated at the time, and began our journey of entrepreneurship.
Love that. And Rick, there might be a couple of University of Michigan Wolverines that listen to this episode. Will you share a little bit more about your experience? I think you played a pretty pivotal role on a season or two, playing with a couple of your buddies who decided to take a professional football path instead of getting into the world of HVAC systems.
Sure. Well, if there are any University of Michigan grads listening, God bless them. And that being said, yeah, I did in the many years ago in the 1980s, from 84 to 88, I did play football for University of Michigan. Had a real special memory last year. Was able to go to the national title game with my son and my father. My son also went to University of Michigan, so for the three of us to celebrate that very special season last year was a highlight. I did, at the time I went to U of M, you wouldn't know by looking at my size now, but a unique position. I was a kicker, place kicker, and I happened to start kicking barefoot. The explanation for that is too long for this podcast. Maybe that's series 2. But it was a long explanation. I didn't go to Michigan as a barefooted kicker, but Bo Schembechler, our coach at the time, in the end, ultimately called me what he called a head case for doing that. But it was prevalent at the time, and it served me well. And some of the players you referenced, some might have heard of a gentleman named Jim Harbaugh, who was our quarterback at the time for the first couple of years, and has obviously had a storied career in both the college coaching world and now back into the NFL. And then my roommate freshman year, at the time, started as a freshman and ended up having a great Michigan football career, but his name was Jamie Morris. And it was a pleasure to room with Jamie my freshman year. Life is good, even after Michigan football, although I would have loved to pursue that route had I had the opportunity.
Yeah, it's pretty darn competitive space, isn't it?
Of course.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, probably what led me down the path of going into the realm of owning and operating my own business that had technical sales for that matter. Obviously very competitive in high school sports, led to collegiate athletics. I did sign a contract, but did not make it in the NFL. And so it's a way of competing and still getting that sense of, in a way, winning. And so kind of maybe the art of the deal, so to speak, that type of stuff. And so just enjoy the competitive nature of the business world. And that's the new juice versus playing athletics.
It's interesting, Rick. As you were just sharing that, I was thinking, as you've built a very successful business with ThermalNetics, certainly you've brought on people, hired people, lots of people over the years. What role, if any, this is just personal curiosity, what role, if any, do you feel those that have played a high level of competitive sports, how that applies to career, to work, to motivation or drive versus those that don't? And I don't know, it may not have any relevance whatsoever. What have you
Well,
discovered?
it served us very well. In our industry, it seems it's a very competitive industry. Like any other industry, we have competitors, and so we are we have an intense focus on culture at ThermalNetics and our core values. And one of those core values is driven to win, and that driven to win piece comes to people that it's a meritocracy, merit-based society, and people are driven to win no matter what their role may be in the organization. Of course, it's easier to define when it's black and white, and you might be a technical sales engineer, and you either win the deal or don't win the deal. But it transcends into other parts of the organization where we help an employee figure out what does winning look like in their particular role to make sure that we all win together and that we're all aligned and accountable toward a common goal and a common good.
Where do you think your competitive spirit came from? Were either your parents athletes, or was it just something that it was just kind of intrinsic to you as you grew up and were playing sports?
I would say probably more from my father. He was not necessarily super athletic himself, but he was definitely very competitive. And so I definitely fell into the category of wanting dad's approval. And so when we were living in California and in Texas, when I was at a young adolescent age, soccer was a sport that was becoming very popular in those two states, not quite as prevalent in the Michigan area at the time. So it kind of gave me a jump start, but I would go out in my backyard when my dad went to work during the summer when I wasn't in school. And, kind of the equivalent of football, the pass, punt, kick competition. There was like a skills competition in soccer, juggling a soccer ball, and those different type of things. And I would spend hours in the backyard just trying to get one more that day, or five more. Or my dad would set up cones in the morning. He'd go to work, and I gave me a stopwatch, and I would dribble through these cones, dribble back, and try to beat my best time. And where that drive came from, I think it was maybe, I don't know if it was an inner drive or a need from approval from dad or a combination of both. And then what that led to, of course, was as I went to the practices or when I initially started in soccer at a very young age, they started me on the field, I think at the age of 6 or what, I was a goalie. And by the time I was 7 or 8, I was perhaps one of the stronger players in the field. And they felt, okay, we're going to get you on the field now. We can't just waste your talent sitting in the goal. So I got out on the field, and of course, you start getting a lot of self-esteem, and it's a lot better scoring goals than stopping goals. Lot more accolades come with that after the game. So it was an enjoyable experience, but I think that's where probably that competitive drive stems from. Yeah.
I love it. Why the world of HVAC?
Well, I went to, I chose Michigan based on engineering. I had other choices as well. Actually, my two other choices, my final choices were going to be go potentially to Duke and play soccer, or to Notre Dame or Michigan and play football. And I ultimately chose Michigan, thinking a very strong engineering school and maybe even perhaps a life after college playing football. And so that's what led me to Michigan. What I didn't understand in going to Michigan is that to be successful, you might actually have to go to class and study and do the work. So that was a hard lesson along the way, which the benefit of that is I got to spend 6 years or 6.5 years in college getting my bachelor's degree versus 4 like many others. And it's a lot of fun. So it was a lesson well learned, but it came with a lot of stress and a lot of strife. But in the end, I stuck the course and did get the engineering degree, which led me into technical sales. And the reason I chose HVAC, it wasn't so much HVAC, it was I really wanted to not have a behind the desk engineering type job. That was probably part of the reason that hindered my success at Michigan in engineering, is I didn't have a passion for it. And so I knew that that degree would have value, and I needed to accomplish and finish that goal or objective. But that led me into technical sales, which led me to more the business side of engineering, which is really what I had a much higher degree of interest in.
It's interesting you say that you weren't necessarily passionate about it. I wanted to ask you, do you think your competitive spirit or your driven to success core value does that only come to things that you're passionate about, or is that spread throughout all aspects of your life? Because I know, speaking personally, I like if I'm not passionate about something, I'm not going to be competitive about it. I'm probably not going to do it. So it really has to like struck a chord with me in order for me to actually get something done, and pursue it. So I'm wondering if that's the same for you.
It's, I'll say it's maybe a flaw and a strength, a weakness and a strength all at the same time. I have tempered it over the years, but very competitive, not just in sports, not just something I was passionate about. Just, I would say more than winning, it was hating to lose. I had this innate drive of whatever's possible. I don't want that pain of losing, to the point of even playing checkers against my grandmother. And grandma was pretty nice, and I actually won at checkers quite a bit. Grandpa, not so much. A matter of fact, grandpa, I can remember having like maybe I had three or four kings on the board, and he had one king, and somehow, some way, all of a sudden, I still lost the game. So, so I think grandpa was trying to teach me a life lesson there. And it resonates with me now still today. But I think it was that drive, not so much, like I said, winning or hating to lose was probably more of a driver than and not wanting to experience that pain. And that has carried me well, or aided me well throughout my life.
So, Rick, I don't know if in 2004 or perhaps shortly before that, that it was maybe a moment, an opportunity for you to, well, a couple of things. Number one, there was an opportunity for you to win by you and two others getting together to acquire ThermalNetics. If I'm getting my dates correct, right? 2004, you acquired it.
Yes.
Was that an opportunity to win, or was there a situation where things were at a point where there's a risk that like I might lose in my career, or I'm just curious, like what was the moment, what was the call to adventure in 2003, 2004 that said, I'm going in this direction, I'm buying this business?
I think it's more the having direct control over the outcome. Not that you have all control. Everybody has good luck and bad luck, and it's what you do with that luck which ultimately determines potentially the outcome of your success. Working for a large corporation, I would never. York was great to me. You know, both financially, progressive level of management. However, the impact that I could have to the organization, or implementation of change, or things that I saw that we should go a different direction, not having the ability to control that, led me to, okay, I want more direct control. And so in the acquisition of ThermalNetics, one thing that was important to me was to actually take a controlling interest in the company. I was able to find two partners that were willing to take a minority share, and it was a great partnership. And it wasn't of course, somebody has to have the final decision, and that's why I felt that was important. The previous two partners at ThermalNetics were 50-50 partners, and that had created some conflict in the organization and actually some divisiveness within the culture. And so felt it was critically important to have someone have the final decision. By the same token, the real reason to go down the path, leaving a very large corporation, is it's a long road and a long hoe to be one CEO that you may never even achieve, and to have that level of control to take a business any direction that you may want to go.
Yeah. What was in maybe it was in leaving York, or maybe it was in acquiring ThermalNetics, but what do you recall, like what were the things that were most at risk for you to make that change?
Well, there was certainly financial risk. So I have two children. They were, at elementary school age, comfortable lifestyle, and so the common cliche, good can be the enemy of great. So we were doing very well and comfortable. So, however, there was just, again, maybe the inner drive to do something more, have more direct control. And although still concerned, not knowing everything, not knowing what might go wrong, was probably a good thing. And just being willing to take the risk, figuring out that whatever obstacle might come up, there's always a solution. And if not, well, then you go a different direction. So, but basically, at some point, to take the risk, it's a risk that I don't regret whatsoever. At least from a business perspective, the best decision I ever made. relative to wanting to be in one place, put roots down in one location with family. And by acquiring the company, knew that that always could be based here, should we choose to want to be. And then also, solidifying, once we got things turned in the right direction, a future for the family, and the people that I love and care about most. So I guess that's how I'll answer that.
There's you mentioned family. How old were your kids when you were?
29-year-old son lives in Manhattan. 26-year-old daughter lives here in Michigan and over on the west side of the state.
Okay, so they were probably between what, like 8 and 12 years old at that point in time.
It would have been, not 9 and 6.
Okay. What were when you think of how, I would imagine it took. It's not like you just show up at 9:30 in the morning and you come back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you're taking over a business. It's like, how'd you manage keeping family healthy along with going down this new path?
Sure. Always talk the talk, family first. Didn't always live it. And so, particularly for the first 3 years, we acquired the company. We didn't start the company. So it was an ongoing concern that had been started in 1972. And so thought that would be an easier path than starting. In the end, that ended up only being true to a point. There was things that happened with the transition of the business that were unexpected. And as a result, logged way too many hours, way too many long nights, and having the inexperience not to truly know what's important and what's not critical and what could wait, trying to do too much too soon. And so that's a lesson learned. And so there was sacrifice involved at the beginning, some of it necessary, potentially, certainly some of it unnecessary. And looking back, if I could change something about the first early years of owning the company, I would certainly have made some different choices, but unfortunately didn't have the experience to make those choices at the time. But that's all right. That quickly has rectified. I mean, I say quickly. I mean, I'd say for a 3 or 5 year period, there was a big ramp up, big learning curve, exponentially different than working at a large corporation.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons to be learned? You don't just have a business partner; you've had several. So what's the lesson to be learned for those that might be considering they want to get into business for themselves? Perhaps they don't have the resources or skill set entirely on their own to make it work, and they would benefit by partnering up with someone. Like, what are some of the things you've really appreciated about that? And then if I ask you just to be just kind of open and honest without giving too much away, like what's been some of the frustrations that you've had?
Sure. Well, I mean, a partnership in business is essentially a marriage. And with that, there are definitely pros and cons. And so there has to be a commitment on everyone's behalf that no matter what obstacle we run into, that we're going to work toward the common good to overcome that obstacle. And that would be true in marriage outside of work, obviously, that everyone has challenges. When I said earlier about bad luck or good luck, whatever it might be, it's how you react and what you do to overcome that. And it's the same thing in business. If in marriage, outside of the context of work, if someone ever pushes what I would call the easy button, and if divorce is an option, someone else cited this to me one time. If divorce is ever mentioned in the context of a marriage, someone might take that option. And so this gentleman, who happens to be a very Christian man and someone I respect dearly, indicated my wife and I early in our marriage took that off the table. If it's off the table, no matter what happens, what occurs, you get through it. And in the context of business, it's kind of been the same way. Certainly, there's been a lot of highs, and there have been some lows. And some of the lows, come down to difference of opinion. There was some economic turmoil in the Michigan marketplace around 2009, 2010, when the automotives were struggling. The business contracted, caused a lot of stress and pressure in the business. And So that's where you have to have a commitment that you're going to find a way to work through this. Um, People are people, whether they're owners in the business, no matter what their role is within the company. Um, Clearly, your greatest joy when the common good is achieved, and sometimes your greatest difficulty and challenges along the way. But in the end, far worth it. It's made the journey that much more satisfying, and as I transition to the next phase for me, it's an exciting time. We put a new leadership and team in place. I'll be stepping out of my current role of president in the next 6 weeks into a chairman type capacity, strategic advisor, and very excited about what the future is next for the company based on the leadership team and succession team we put in place.
So you actually, if I heard you correctly, you actually put on the table up front that divorce is not an option.
Correct.
Did I hear you correctly? Okay.
Yes.
That's like, I love how clear that expectation was from day one. And so
I credit it to somebody else because it wasn't my idea. I think I'm not saying my wife's taking it off the table. I took it off the table. So there you go. You'll have to get her on a podcast and see what she says. But actually, she's great, and we're committed. We've been married 32 years, and marriage is a journey like everything else, and nothing is ever perfect, but you make it as perfect as it can be, and that's it.
By setting that off the table early on in your business, did it make it extremely easy to not think about it? Or were there moments where you may have been like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have given myself no out or something along those lines? Were there ever moments of doubt in your decision to do that?
Well, yeah, there's definitely challenges along the way because everyone doesn't think the same. And that's a good thing with any business, some diversity of thought. But sometimes that causes strife and conflict. We implemented in 2017, 2018, a system, operating system, methodologies to run our business. And that was really put in place for two things, alignment and accountability, because prior to doing that, being that we had three principals or three owners of the business, I'll reallocate our names as mom and dad and somebody else. If someone in the organization came to mom and didn't like the answer, they might just go to dad and ask the same thing to see if they get what they want. And so putting this mechanism or system in place to run our business helped alleviate that. The unintended consequence of that is it did cause some, I'll say, conflict in the organization that didn't exist or wasn't as obvious that it maybe already existed, because that system does force accountability and alignment. And prior to that, we had less of both. So accountability and alignment, if you haven't been doing that and there's a behavioral change, that's going to naturally create some conflict that has to be worked through.
Rick, as you're looking forward, you said you're stepping away from you're stepping away from a very active role in the business over the next few months. What are some of the tests and challenges you feel you might confront as you take on this new role? Whether the new role in the way it exists as part of ThermalNetics, but the new role for you as Rick.
Oh, sure. So I think there'll be a lot of different moving pieces to that. Certainly from my standpoint, it's been such a huge part of my life that I'm going to have to compartmentalize my new role, which would be an advisor of the company, being on a day-to-day, and in a way intentionally be absent and get out of the way and be there only when needed, which is going to allow additional space to do things in my life. And right now I don't exactly have figured out what that's going to be. So I certainly am aware of peers, other business owners that have left their business, whether it be sold, whether it be retired, whatever it might be. And some have flourished and some have struggled, and still trying to solve and figure out that riddle about how I can enjoy this next chapter even more or equivalent to what the last 20 years have been in this role.
It's interesting. You were talking earlier about how your decision to, set up ThermalNetics the way you wanted to when you acquired it with one person. Like there needs to be a decision maker. There needs to be one person. You wanting that control to make decisions. And now it sounds like you're stepping away from the ability to make either those bigger decisions or just decisions within the company to that level. What changed over the period of time you working there from you kind of learning, okay, I'm comfortable with not making those decisions anymore, whether it be the big ones? If I'm totally wrong, let me know. But if that's the case, what have you learned along the way that's made you comfortable with that?
Well, that's a bit personal. I won't go into great details other than I had a major medical event personally, about 11 years ago, which actually took me out of the business for about 6 months. And when I feel blessed by the grace of God to come back and be in the capacity that I'm at, but what it did, it actually ended up being a healthy revelation for the company. It allowed me to realize that the company was perhaps far too much about me or my thoughts as opposed to the collective efforts of all. And so along the way to learn that to delegate and let go of the vine, so to speak, and let go of some of those leadership responsibilities. And that's where, running that EOS business system was a blessing in that it drove functional accountability for certain things within the organization to one person that was not me. So it was a freeing experience. So what that's led to now is our success in the business to the next generation leadership team. I've already learned to an extent how to let go. And so my role for the last 6 or 12 months has to try to intentionally do less and less in terms of active day-to-day decisions and let the functional leaders within the business make those decisions. And they've done a great job. And I've got confidence that the company is in a great place to move forward going in the future.
What what's been your proudest moment sitting in whether it's around ThermalNetics or York, or just as a husband or father? Like, I'm going to ask you just be a little bit introspective and just say, like, boy, if there was
it's hard to isolate one thing. I think in the context of my family, my wife, the family that we built, the closeness of our family, and imparting our family values to our children. Both my children are currently engaged, so we're excited about the upcoming weddings. And so again, we have placed a priority in our families, and we're hoping by doing so and leading by that example that our kids will do the same. And then we're in the context of the business, I don't think there's any singular moment other than somehow where we've arrived now. So where we've arrived now is I truly feel that if the three principals that acquired the business in 2004 were no longer here, the company would continue to grow for the foreseeable future based on the culture that we've been very intentional about contributing to and building, and based on the collective team of employees that we have in place in their current roles.
Yeah, and that's not something to, how I say it, that deserves an enormous amount of credit. Like the number of business owners that are unsuccessful in de-risking the business of themselves, that's a big number. I mean, I was just on the phone earlier today with another business owner where they realized we're going through this assessment, and he's looking at it, and his comment was like, "Oh, holy crap! Like, this business depends on me far more than I ever imagined." And
yeah.
Good.
So God works in mysterious ways, and so perhaps I'm not sure of God's plan, but perhaps what happened to me 11 years ago was a awakening moment that had that not occurred, I might have landed in that exact same place, or we might have. I mean, it's hard to say. I would hope that wouldn't have been the case, but we'll never know. Yeah. So in a way, I'll attribute that as a blessing, and that it was maybe not so healthy for the family, But for the business, it was over the long term, it's been a healthy development.
Yeah. Biggest, how do I say it? What's been the best piece of advice you've gotten from somebody and why?
Again, a very broad question.
I mean, aside from like, don't pet a burning dog.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I had talked before, like I gave an example of the take divorce off the table, but I think nothing's popping immediately to mind other than, in the context of the business, the book Good to Great was probably, I would say, the most singular, influential book that I've read in my business career, but perhaps even transcending behind that. Certainly, at the time we acquired ThermalNetics, I was not lacking in confidence. So if you're familiar with the Good to Great story, the level 3, level 4, level 5 leader, again, alluding back to the business not being was too much about me. So certainly wasn't a level 5 leader and still am not today. That would be someone very humble that no one would even know who you are. And it maybe in the last few years, not as much, but previous to that, I was way too much, maybe the face of ThermalNetics, less so today. And so I think that level of humility and that it's not all about you, critical lesson. And then also from that, related to that same book, right person, right seat, and running and leading and managing the business in that manner has been critical to our success of making sure that we have the right cultural fit and the right people in the organization.
I know you touched on it earlier, but you're speaking to this transitional phase of your career and stepping away a little bit and trying to figure out what you will do with your time. What kind of rewards do you think this new transformation will offer? What kind of things do you think you have to gain by stepping away a little bit from this position in the business?
Yeah, I'm really looking at it like I'm being very careful. Someone gave me a book that kind of essentially framed what retirement means or doesn't mean. And the lesson I learned from the book essentially was if I retire, I die sooner. That if anybody's listened to that book was called My Plan to Living to 156 by Dan Sullivan. But that wasn't really the message that I wanted to hear, but it was probably a message I needed to hear. And instead of what the next or final chapter would be, I've reframed it in my mind to simply what's next. And what that really is, I would like to say I'm going to dedicate, 100% of my time to charitable causes and family. But I know myself and I know I wouldn't be true to myself if I said that. So both of those things are critically important, and I will do something in both of those areas. But I won't singularly do that. And so, from the standpoint of something in business, don't know what that looks like yet, but have some time to figure it out. And I know it will be something, just not sure. So I'm a kind of an exploratory, open to options, and that is a nice part of our transition plan here. Is I have a little bit of time as acting to advisor of the company to kind of figure out what next means for me.
What do you want people to say about you when you step away and you take a more hands-off role? What the I don't want to say legacy is always such a big term, and sometimes it can get to people's heads in one way or another, but the impact you've had on the business throughout your career, what are things you want people to say about you when you step away from it?
I would like them to say that he was kind and that he cared. I will joke often sarcastically that I don't care. And it might not be the smartest thing to do, and I say it often, far too often. But deep down, certainly our team knows that I do care and I care deeply. And so I think those would be the biggest things that he cared and he was kind and he helped us achieve our common goal.
Love it. I love it. Rick, as we bring our conversation to a close, I always like to ask, make create an opportunity for folks to learn more about you or ThermalNetics. So where can people find Rick or find ThermalNetics for those that may be more interested in your business and what you guys are up to?
Well, we are working on, in terms of finding Rick, obviously, I'm not very active in the social media market. I have the traditional LinkedIn, don't really use Facebook, but of course, the ThermalNetics website would be a way to contact me should anyone want to. In terms of the company, we are launching a new marketing campaign, just resetting that for the next generation, getting more active in those things that we talked about so that we have expanded our reach, so to speak. So I don't know if I really answered that question very well.
Oh, no, it's great. It's for those listening, ThermalNetics, amazing organization based in Auburn Hills. It's Thermal, THER, M as in Mary, AL, N as in Nancy, ETICS, thermalnetics.com. And as I've always understood it, it's like you guys put those big, huge HVAC condensers, chillers, stuff on roofs and outside of buildings to make amazing indoor environments healthy, safe, and comfortable. So I probably did a terrible job.
Well, yeah, I guess the message there is it's good to have people. So thank you, Preston, for doing what I could not have stated so eloquently. So yeah, we do, as I said earlier, commercial air conditioning, our vertical markets. The core of our business had been K through 12 schools. Obviously, we all care about indoor air quality, that, bringing kind of the fresh air indoors and the air that our kids breathe and live. And that transcends to all part of life. And so hospital market, healthcare, assisted livings, multifamily, again, even big hospitality, big hotels, casinos, gaming areas to, again, purify the air and conserve energy, which are things that we all care about for the greater good. And so happy to have that mission and happy to the place that ThermalNetics played in that toward that mission.
Love it. Rick, just thanks very much for sharing some time with us this afternoon. And glad you didn't give out Matt's personal cell phone number to contact.
Perfect. Yeah. If you reach out to ThermalNetics, that may be the reply, cell phone number for Matt Russell, president.
Right.
Exactly. And yes, and for anyone that might watch this future podcast, hopefully you're local, because the closing message is next year, go Lions. Should have been this year, but next year.
Lions is right.
Now we might have discarded some other people. We might have regionalized this podcast now by having that comment, but hopefully everyone supports the Lions universally. Yeah.
And if you don't, there's plenty of other podcasts to tune into.
Exactly.
Say it gently like that.